Hello. Have you ever, throughout any mental health crises you've had, any mental suffering you've been living with and under, has it ever made you want to harm an animal, harm a child, harm another adult human being, physically, emotionally, through neglect, abuse, psychological torture? Have you? Because there's that fence, isn't there? There's that fence. And the saying goes, there's two types of people in the world, and we use this to point out all types of qualities, virtues, or lack thereof. And there are two types of people in the world. There's the type of person in the world that will say, oh, well, I was having a cognitive impairment due to something. I was suffering a mental illness. I was having a mental health crisis. And therefore, the pressure, the stress has allowed me to be cruel to a child. I never would have done so otherwise. I'm innocent. It's bogus, isn't it? It's bogus, because when you're a person that has had cognitive impairments, you've suffered through mental health crisis, or you live with a mental illness of an ongoing nature, and you're someone that doesn't harm children, animals, other adults, you know that's completely bogus, don't you? Because you know what's in you and what's not. You know what you're capable of. Okay, you might self-harm, you might commit criminal acts. For example, a young man who is very angry, suffering depression, and he might drive his car at 120 k's through a 60 zone, being reckless. He might, a person might commit some sort of theft or fraudulent act, or, just these bizarre things that people might do as well, because of cognitive impairment, etc., right? But there's these lines, isn't there? It's a different thing to physically or emotionally abuse a living being. It takes this barrier to be not there. I don't think it's an excuse. And I'm not talking about sociopaths, such as, in my opinion, which I'm not qualified to give, I'm not talking about sociopaths like Don and Candace Wells, okay? Their whole MO is to harm others. That's why they're on planet Earth, right? And they get a fucking kick out of it. They're the most selfish, decrepit people. Okay? I'm not talking about sociopaths and things like that. And why am I mentioning this? Well, I wanted to talk to you about William Tyrrell's foster parents, okay? Because, as we've discussed briefly before, they're up on child abuse charges in New South Wales courts. And it's probably going to be heard around February the 22nd. And the foster mother has asked to have her case heard under the Mental Health Act of New South Wales, right? So what might this involve? Well, child abuse being the application of unreasonable physical force that could be, hand to body, hitting with a stick or an object like a belt, or, throwing something at a child that could, you're using physical force of some type. It could be anything that's going to cause actual or potential harm. So physically or emotionally, it includes emotional ill treatment, it includes sex abuse. Now, both parents have been charged with this, both foster parents, the foster mother who's 56 at the moment, the foster father who's 54, William Tyrrell's foster parents. And why might she want to do this? Well, obviously, for the minimum, for the case to be adjourned for a while whilst she gets mental health treatment, or for the case to be dismissed. And, she'd just have to show under Section 32 that she's suffering a mental illness, that she's got cognitive impairment, or that she's got a mental illness that would be treatable in some sort of mental health facility. And I guess that would relate back to an adjournment. If it's going to be adjourned, she'd have to show that she's getting this treatment, and maybe it would be within a facility. Now, I'd like to point out, it's assumed probably that the child that's been abused is William's biological sister. This doesn't have to be the case. We don't even know if they fostered any more children, but we could probably assume it's William's sister that they've had custody of throughout this entire 7-year shitstorm. These parents have had William's sister, who was there at the time of William's disappearance, September 12th, 2014, in Kendall, in their care to manipulate the entire time. So can we speculate, is it emotional manipulation that the child abuse, the charges pertain to? It doesn't necessarily mean that they have been physically abusive. It might mean that the foster mother has been manipulating the foster daughter this entire time, which is what is suspected, right? Because she has been gaslit for 7 years, and maybe this has become apparent throughout the inquest process. Who knows? The inquest was supposed to be drawn to a close in March this year, 2020, and because of COVID, 2 days before it was supposed to be wrapped up, it was put on hold. However, the investigation is still ongoing. We've talked about before the bone fragment and fabric fragments being found on Batar Creek Road in Kendall. This is sort of, you've got Benaroon Drive and you've got bush in between, this other Batar Creek Road kind of. It's not very far from the house as the crow flies, about 1 kilometre. That has been forensically tested by a team led by the person who found and examined Daniel Morecambe's remains. Daniel Morecambe, a very famous case from Queensland here. Anywho, so they've been accused of child abuse by New South Wales Police, by the officer that's now leading Operation Roseanne. What's his name? Is it Ogilvy? And so this could be physical, emotional, sexual abuse, right? It's just child abuse. Contains all these things. We don't know what the act is that they're charged with. it's both parents. I'd say it could very well be emotional abuse pertaining to the disappearance of William and some sort of emotional pressure and manipulation. I'm not sure. Or perhaps it is physical striking out, and this child has been harmed physically, and they're going to say, well, we're just so stressed out, this has taken everything out of us, this has been a witch hunt, we are under so much pressure, we can't think straight, we just snapped. Just snapping is not an excuse to harm a child, and this is a foster child, and these parents, these foster parents, are protected by suppression. The judge throwing the suppression over them and their family. If William is dead, why the hell, and presumed dead, which is now stated, why the hell is there a suppression, and why the hell is this foster child still with them? Has she been removed? This is what we don't know, where the foster child is, William's sister, and we don't know the type of abuse, but we don't even know if this couple have had other foster children gifted to them and it involves them. That was just something I thought of. I don't know why. But it's most likely William's sister. Now, we talked about the timeline in the past as well, and I've mentioned the photo that the foster mother says this is the last photo. It was taken at 9:37. William's in his Spider-Man costume. He's sitting on the veranda and he's going rah, and it doesn't look like that at all. It doesn't look like he's going rah up at all. It looks like he's going ah. And his sister's in the background there, his slightly older sister. I'm wearing this for the public service announcement to say what bullshit it is to give an excuse that you're under a lot of pressure or you're mentally ill at the time or something like that when you harm a child, because there is no excuse. Because if you suffer these conditions, you know there are things you consider doing and would never consider doing. You know the degrading things you might do, or the illegal things. I'm not saying I'm doing illegal or degrading things, but I'm not saying I haven't been in some terrible situations. You know where that line is, right? You know what is at your core. And yeah, there are those two types of people. The ones that will abuse and the ones that will not. Now, I'm not saying there's not vicarious abuse and neglect that can happen, okay, because of mental health and impairments, mental health illness, stress, things like that, where you don't know where you are from one day to the next, and animals may not be fed and watered and things like that. That is neglect, okay? I'm talking about abuse. I'm talking about child abuse, which is what the charges are. This harm conducted against another, causing immediate or future harm to health, survival, what else? And, development or dignity. That's right, were the other terms. And they're very serious charges. The photograph, there's an issue that needs to be cleared up because of the EXIF data, EXIF, right? So it's like a digital fingerprint, and the digital fingerprint on this photo seems to be showing it was taken at 7:39. That's when it was created. But then the times put on there 9:37, which gives a bit of unexplained time, right? And how this now becomes even more important, that the New South Wales Police sort this issue out once and for all, is because it's come to light that a local person to the Benaroon Drive address, Richard Donahue, he was at a local tennis club and he'd been playing there since about 8:10. He'd finished playing. He's preparing to leave, and he's acquainted with, through the club, a policewoman who was off duty at the time, first name Wendy. And in the club, he heard Wendy take a phone call, and from the phone call, he gathered that a child was missing. He didn't know it was William or where it was, but this is what he garnered from what he overheard. He then left the club, and he's gotten his time wrong, partly due to looking at the club's CCTV timing, which was out. The police have now nailed down the time that he left the club as being nearly 9:40, about 9:43, with Wendy taking the call at about 9:37, right? Now, at 9:30, right? So you've got a policewoman off duty who may or may not be known to the foster family directly, or maybe someone that they know that they've called and then has called her. Isn't it funny though? 9:30 she's called. A photo is changed to say, possibly changed to say the time of 9:37. Richard Donahue leaves. He goes to his property 250 metres away from the house William Tyrrell went missing from. And when he gets there, the foster father is in his garden searching for William, calling out, and the foster father goes into his shed and he's looking around, going through this man's things without asking, and he assumes him to be the father, and he puts it together that Wendy, who took the call at 9:30, was being told about this missing boy, William Tyrrell. Well, the foster mother rang 000 at 10:57, saying William went missing around 10:30. And the foster father was said not to be home, or was he home? It's all up in the air about when he was home and when the conversation happened between him and his wife about calling 000. The timeline has to be nailed down, right? Because it's all up in the air, and it just, these are the alarm bells. These are glaring spotlights on the lies of these foster people who are lying. You don't lie for a reason other than to cover up something that you don't want known, okay? To lie about a timeline is to hide what truly happened. So if you've got everything happening 45 minutes earlier, there's a whole lot of missing time. You've got the mother, foster mother, driving around just like Candace Wells went driving off, didn't she? You've got foster mother driving around, and now bone, which isn't confirmed as human bone, and cloth, the colours of William's Spider-Man suit. Let's call it a costume. It's not clothing really, it's a costume. Being found where she went, saying that, she was there looking, right? and she would have been driving her mother's vehicle, the vehicle that is being forensically examined right now. So speaking of forensically examined vehicles, there is another guy similar in name to Richard. His name's Robert Donahoe. He's a convicted sex offender. He abused in the sort of 2000s and leading up to 2014. He abused a couple of guys that he met through the SES volunteer service that he is involved with. Known as a local creep, working at a Caltex station in Lakewood at the time, Lakewood being the town where the foster father went off to make his call that morning, and Lakewood being the town where the washing repairman lived in, Snedden. He was hunted down by Hard Jube, Gary Jubelin. And Robert was there searching for William on that morning, and I guess because he's a creep, the charges were pending. He was on bail at the time. He subsequently went to prison for these assaults on these men, really, but they were the intellectually challenged persons that he took advantage of and he abused. He went to prison for that, and just before he was out of prison in 2018, so 4 years later, the strike force go and search his van, which was parked in on property in Wagga Wagga at Robert's father's home. There's so many persons of interest, but as far as I know, Robert Donahoe was never named a person of interest. He's a local creep. Apparently he'd keep chickens in his van and sometimes sleep in there. Well, that's no crime. But testimony is given by the Lakewood Caltex manager that, you know, young women wouldn't like to come in, schoolgirls, etc. Didn't like coming to the gas station because Robert was creepy and freaked them out. And he is a known sex offender, but there's a lot surrounding this case. He offended on older men, not on a young boy. I'm not saying that that's means that he couldn't abduct a child, and certainly having a van, you know, would be useful. He's there at the search. But, you know, he's been investigated, and as far as I know, he's not a person of interest. But it is so sickening how many people in that area have been uncovered as persons of interest purely because they are scumbags, you know. So yeah, that's just really what I wanted to say. Do you think that this is reasonable, but that the foster mother now cites, you know, the Mental Health Act? She wants to be protected under the Mental Health Act of New South Wales for whatever child abuse charge she's up against, when she's already named as a person of interest in a missing child's case. This child that was in her care, 3-year-old boy, completely vulnerable, completely dependent on her. She has told story after story after story. We don't have a timeline. She's now up on child abuse charges along with the foster father, and she wants to be heard under the Mental Health Act. Now, yes, if foster mother is completely innocent of any crime against William, well, number one, why so many lies? But let's just say she is. Yes, this is a devastating event. Her life has been forever changed from that day, just like so many others. She would be devastated. She would be suffering depression, anxiety, maybe agoraphobia, or all sorts of issues, okay? Is that an excuse for then allegedly abusing who might be, William's sister? And how long has it been going on? What else has happened up until the time when this daughter, foster daughter, might be old enough to actually express things, brave enough to express things? She's old enough now to speak out a little bit more. When you are 5, 6, 7, 8, you're very young, you're very much under the spell. And yeah, as you grow 10, 11, 12, you do become more autonomous and more able to assimilate in your own mind, or to process in your own mind what's really going on. You get this growth in cognitive ability or understanding, who knows? But I just think, no, she should not be let off the hook in that regard. Okay, maybe, sure, get treatment under a psychologist. If you're having this much issue with your mental health that it's brought you to child abuse, why are you not already being treated by a psychiatrist or a psychologist? And if you are already being treated by a psychologist or a psychologist, sorry, I'm just rambling now anyway, aren't I? Maybe I'll just re-record this. It's very scattered. It's too long. Speak to you later.